Good morning. Good morning. On behalf of Santa Clara University, the Law School, and the Northern California Innocence Project, I am delighted to welcome you to the symposium today. We have a very impressive array of speakers on the critical topic of advancing justice in conviction review programs. Today's moderator, Judge Cordell, encouraged our students recently, saying they shouldn't just be bystanders to injustice. They should be upstanders. Thanks to NCIP, we can all be upstanders today, sharing ideas to make our justice system more fair and sustainable. I'm honored now to introduce the dynamo behind today's symposium, Lucy Salcido Carter. Lucy.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm really happy to see you here. It's great. I wanted to just give you a little bit of information about who is in the room. We have 350 people registered for this event. About 37 are prosecutors. About 40 are public defenders. 9 work for law enforcement. 4 are judges. 57 are attorneys in private practice. 38 work for nonprofit policy and innocence organizations. 12 work for the California legislature or for legislators. 16 work for other government agencies. 46 are academics or researchers, 36 are students, and 5 are exonerees or family members of exonerees. Although we each bring our unique perspective to post-conviction review, we all care deeply about the issue. We all share some common goals, and we can all learn from each other. Today is a chance to learn from each other, and also to see how we can reach those goals. So I was looking at the National Registry of Exoneration's website yesterday. I find it very inspiring to look at it. And I saw that as of yesterday, there were 1,668 exonerations since 1989. So we know the criminal justice system can be fallible. We know that mistakes do get made. We don't really know how many wrongful convictions occur each year. Researchers use numbers of exonerations among unique populations to estimate percentages, but then heavily qualify those percentages. So we really don't know, but we can safely say that it is a significant number. When I was looking at the National Registry of Exonerations, I also saw the report for 2014. There were 125 exonerations in 2014, and of that number, 49 happened through conviction review programs. That's almost 2/5 of the number of exonerations. The report goes on to talk about the different programs that are happening around the country, and including quite a few of the programs that are represented here today, and including our local Santa Clara County program. We're really grateful for the attention that conviction review programs put on post-conviction review. We see the accomplishments of the program so far, and we see the promise of what they can do in the future. And we want to know more about how they work and how they could work better. It's this curiosity and hopefulness that led us to host today's event. So I want to say thank you to today's presenters for being willing to share what they know. Many have traveled great distances to get here. I also want to thank everybody who was involved in making this event happen. I do want to acknowledge Todd Fries. He's right here. He's the NCIP Operations Director and the co-organizer of this event. He worked with me every step of the way. And this symposium was his idea, so we have him to thank for it. Please welcome Judge Cordell, who will lead us through our day together.
Good morning, everyone. Oh, come on. Lord have mercy. Come on. Good morning. The energy in this room is amazing, and it's going to get more amazing as the day goes on. So good morning and welcome. Thank you so much, Lucy, and your crew for making all this happen, and thank you, Todd. So this is a huge and amazing gathering of some of the best and the brightest in the legal profession and of those in the business of changing our criminal justice system for the better. So I have the honor of guiding us through today's program, which really means simply keeping us on schedule. And since I'm a control freak, that is not a problem. So let us begin. Please welcome now retired Assistant District Attorney Karen Sununu Towery and exoneree Rick Walker.
We're going to tell a 12-year journey that Rick Walker had in the criminal justice system from 1991 till 2003. I only played a role in this story in 2003. This is a very long story, so we are abbreviating it and trying to tell it in 25, 30 minutes. I know all of you will have questions, especially personal questions for Rick, and please ask him those during the day. You will find that he is very well informed and has the gift of gab that I don't have.
Thank you, Karen.
This case also, I want to say, did not involve the current district attorney. And of course, I will give you a spoiler alert, and that is we're going to talk about the murder of a woman named Lisa Hopewell, and Rick Walker did not commit that murder. Furthermore, there are two names I want you to remember. One is Rashawn Bowers. He was a co-defendant of Rick's when he was tried. And the other name to remember is Mark Swanson, who we ultimately determined was the real killer of Lisa Hopewell. Rick, would you briefly tell this group what you were doing in 1991 before your arrest and how you knew the woman named Lisa Hopewell?
Okay, in 1991, I was living in the city of East Palo Alto, right here on the peninsula in the Bay Area, and I lived at my parents' home, right? And I was just working as they put it in the community, as just a roadside mechanic, a shade tree mechanic, if you will, right? And so I repaired a lot of cars in the area, and I knew almost everybody in the city, right? My mother was on the school board, and my father drove trucks, and I came from a good family, and in 1991, East Palo Alto was basically kind of like out of control. It was really bad. And so in 1992, it became the murder capital of the world per capita. And just my luck, the trial was going on during the time East Palo Alto was the murder capital of the world, right? And the rest is real easy. It goes downhill from there.
The crime was horrendous. Lisa Hopewell was found in a condominium in January of 1991. The condominium was boarded. She was a heavy crack user, severely addicted to crack cocaine. She had been hogtied with duct tape, her face had been covered, and her throat had been slit. Police came and did a thorough investigation. They took duct tape off of her body. They removed a glove tip from that duct tape and also found a fingerprint on the duct tape. They confiscated other material at the scene, such as cigarette butts. Let's see, the lighting here isn't very good, so you'll just have to trust me that those pictures are up there. The fingerprints proved to be from Rashawn Bowers, the person I mentioned as Rick's co-defendant. He was interviewed 3 times by law enforcement, and I'll briefly go over those interviews. In the first interview, he said, "I have no idea what you're talking about." Law enforcement put him on a lie detector test. They told him he had failed, and he said, "Okay, actually, I was there. I was in the closet, and there were a couple of white guys there." Law enforcement also told Rashawn Bowers that a man named Rick Walker's voice was on Lisa Hopewell's telephone. And Lisa Hopewell and Rick Walker had briefly dated. So that explains his voice on there. But they didn't mention that to Bowers. They just mentioned that his voice was on there. So it's police giving information to a suspect. Second interview, Bowers said, you know what, Walker was there. He was there. They put him on a lie detector. He failed it. Third interview, they said, come on, tell us what happened. He goes, okay, I'll tell you what happened. There weren't any white guys there. It was just Rick Walker and me. He made me do it. I had to wrap the tape around her. Rick Walker killed her. No lie detector given. That was it. The next stop was the interview of Rick Walker. How old were you then, Rick?
I think 35. Yeah.
And let's see if we have we have a grand jury slip up there. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the case, there was a grand jury of this done in 2003 when we indicted Mark Swanson for the murder of Lisa Hopewell. So this picture is taken from that piece of evidence. So Rick, could you tell us briefly what happened during your interview?
Well, during the initial interview, right, they were telling me that they believe that I was the murderer of Lisa Hopewell, and I denied it. And they kept asking me for information about this, over and over and over about, right? And the only thing I could tell them was I wasn't there and I didn't do it, right? And what else could I say? And this just went on and on and on, and for days. And then the polygraph examination and all of that, right? And I didn't know anything, right? But I feared for my life, right? And what can I say? What can I say to these people that could convince them, right? And you try to help. You try to help to get yourself out of this mess. And the only thing that comes back to mind every time I say that is the Miranda rights, right? And the best thing you could possibly do is just be quiet and get a lawyer, right? But me, being a mechanic, I'm trying to fix this, and I can't fix it. And so it just snowballed out of hand. It really did. The interviews were just, they're like, yeah, he did it. What can I tell them? I wasn't there. I didn't do it.
And the brief time I've been volunteering at the Innocence Project here at Santa Clara, this is a recurring theme, that an innocent person who is interviewed can't deny what he doesn't know. I think there's a hip-hop song that says that. It's hard to deny what you don't know, but
Right.
It's a very frustrating part of an interview for a person who is innocent. So the trial was brief. There was no physical evidence to connect Rick Walker. There was no DNA. There were no prints. There were 3 crucial witnesses who testified. One was Rick's alibi witness, a woman who took the stand and said, I will tell you Rick Walker was with me the night of the murder. Unfortunately, she told police when she was first interviewed that she didn't know anything about Rick Walker and was not with him. So in California, you can use a prior inconsistent statement to impeach someone and for the truth of the matter. So although the alibi witness gave Rick his true alibi, she was impeached, and that was used for the truth of the matter, that she had no idea where Rick Walker was. A second witness said, you know that glove tip you picked up at the scene? I know those gloves. I gave them to Rick Walker. And she was a former scorned girlfriend who had received a secret deal from the prosecutor. She had been in custody on drug charges, and she had been released on 2 separate occasions while his case was pending, and that arrangement had not been disclosed to Mr. Walker or his attorney. And finally, and most damning, was Rashawn Bowers. He received a deal in the middle of trial which allowed him a 15 to life sentence on a second-degree murder, which he took and then testified against Rick Walker, telling the same story he had told to police. Now, Rick, during that trial, did you feel that it was going well?
On the second day of trial, I called my parents at home and I said, I'm going to prison for the rest of my life. On the second day of trial, I knew it. They had set a stage. It was ridiculous what was going on in that courtroom. They just set this up, tag you're it, and you're going to prison for this, right? I just knew it. I mean, my attorney kept saying, they still have to prove the case. They still have to prove the case. I said, no, they didn't. No, they don't, right? They've made a case. They don't have to prove it if they make it. It's their case. And so that was my thought to this. And then to have this, I asked that Rashawn Bowers be removed from the courtroom, right? Because I told my attorney, I says, well, if he's got to deal with them, it's going to be, it's a secret deal, but he's got to deal with them. How can he be the star witness for the prosecution, my accuser, right, and my co-defendant? How can that be, right? And these were just simple questions that I was asking, and when I couldn't get answered those questions, I already knew at that point that I was going to get convicted for this. I really was, right? And I sat in a trial with my accuser sitting at a table next to me, right? And throughout the whole trial. And that just, I mean, anybody sit there and see that, right? And then he gets to study the whole trial, so in the 11th hour, he can come and testify.
And that's exactly what happened. A couple of other layers of unfairness were that the defense attorney had an alcohol abuse problem and was drinking throughout the trial.
On his breath every day.
The jury,
in the courtroom.
The jury found Rick guilty of first-degree murder, and after trial, but before sentencing, his father did an amazing investigation. And two witnesses came forward, two separate witnesses, that said, we have information that Mark Swanson is the person who committed this murder, and they had good information. So the trial prosecutor and the trial investigator for the prosecutor went to Mark Swanson and basically said to him, you didn't kill Lisa Hopewell, did you? And he said, no, I didn't. And that was it. And that was the first sign in Rick's long journey of 12 years incarcerated of what the prosecution did was they did kind of a confirmation bias interview, looking to support what they believed was true, gathering evidence that supported the hypothesis that Rick Walker was guilty, rather than asking open-ended questions the way any investigator would do if they're looking for the truth. But by now he'd been convicted, and they were simply confirming what they believed. So the work that Rick's father did was not brought to light, and Rick was sentenced to state prison. And those of you in law enforcement, you may be saying, well, this is an ordinary case. I know about cases like this, where one co-defendant turns on another, even though there's no physical evidence. We can see a motive because he used to date Lisa Hopewell. And so off Mr. Walker goes, and it's an ordinary criminal case. But it wasn't ordinary, and it took an extraordinary turn after he was incarcerated. And that turn was really serendipity or luck, and it was not, it was not in any way an ordinary story from now on. Enter Allison Tucker, who is now a Superior Court judge in Alameda County. She went to court shortly after Rick was convicted, and she was simply a law student at Stanford. Here's the serendipity. Allison's mother was on the school board in Palo Alto, and Rick's mother was on the school board in East Palo Alto. And these two women had become friends over the years. And Mrs. Walker said to Mrs. Tucker, hey, my son's been wrongfully convicted. Can your daughter do something? And Allison did something. She started to learn about the case even when she was in law school. And she took on that case and never let it go until 2003. She knew about what Rick's father had done. She tried to talk to the DA about it a number of years later when she was hired by the DA, and she was told that no, she could not be involved in it because Rick was a personal friend. And I think this is another milestone that we should look at. When prosecutors get information from family and friends, they tend to discount it because there's a bias. You think there's a bias. So she was really discounted. Allison went on to work at the U.S. Supreme Court. Oh, I said that. And then she was at the DA's office. She went to Morrison and Forrester, and that's when she really took on the case and began a great deal of investigation. She made a total of 5 tries at the Santa Clara DA's office. Once before habeas, once after habeas, once in 1999, and once in 2001. And each time, there was a response from the DA's office. The DA's office did a little bit. They took one little piece of what she had concern about, they looked at it, and then the case was set aside. For instance, she asked that there be testing of DNA. There was testing of DNA on the cigarette butts, but it was only compared to Rick Walker. So again, you have some confirmation bias. Well, maybe his DNA isn't on the cigarette butt, but that doesn't mean he's not there. Case set aside. Test it for fingerprints of other objects in the room compared against Rick Walker. Oh, his fingerprints aren't there, but that doesn't mean he wasn't there. Case set aside. So in a piecemeal fashion, the DA's office responded to Allison Tucker. In 2003, I took over the homicide unit and found a piece of evidence with Allison Tucker's name on it and had no idea about this case. At that time, there was no process in place. There was no innocence unit or integrity review. There was just no such assignment in the office. And I had been told that Walker won't talk. You know, people really didn't want to hear anything more about Rick Walker because Walker won't talk. And I think this is another milestone for investigation. Prosecutors tend to go, well, if the man claims he's innocent, shouldn't he talk to us? Well, we don't say that when someone gets arrested and we're beginning an investigation. We go on and look at everything to try to figure out whether or not someone is innocent or guilty. So I thought the fact that he won't talk really isn't something we should consider.
Especially to the people who convicted me. Why would I talk to them, right? For what reason, right? They convicted me. These are the same 2 investigators. No.
So the trial attorney also was positive that Walker was good for it. And that was another reason the case was put aside. So putting aside Allison Tucker's relationship to Rick Walker, the fact he wouldn't talk, the fact that we had some DNA that was not proving anything one way or another, we decided to take a new approach to a case like this, and we just reopened the case. We looked at the facts differently. That's all it was. The 5th time she came to the DA's office, we just looked at it differently. We assigned 2 experienced investigators to the case, investigators that were not involved in the original case. We asked the trial attorney to have nothing to do with it. We reviewed all the documents, including the sheriff's file. We took a global view of the case rather than a piecemeal view of the case. For instance, we found room service receipts that supported the alibi. The alibi witness had been in a room with another person. You know, there were 2 hamburgers, 2 Coca-Colas. We interviewed all of the witnesses that Allison Tucker mentioned, not just one or two. We put fresh eyes on everything, and we re-interviewed in view of new information coming out, and we retested the physical evidence, comparing it to the man who everyone had been naming as the guilty party since the day that Rick Walker was convicted. 12 years later, we compared the cigarette butt DNA to the DNA of Mark Swanson and got a hit. The truth came out. The witnesses lied, and they admitted it. There was Brady evidence in the sheriff's file, including a letter from Rashawn Bowers written in blood saying, "You offered me a deal, when am I going to get it?" New witnesses identified Mark Swanson. I told you the cigarette butts came out positive. Swanson confessed. Rashawn Bowers apologized for lying. And Rick Walker interviewed. He was found factually innocent. And I think his story is very compelling. I think it had a happy ending, but I'm sorry that ending didn't come either right before his trial or right after the trial, because the information was there, and it was information that was ignored. After that, we started a conviction review program, and I'm sorry, Linda, we called it the Innocence Project then. And really, I think the theme of it was we had had a failure of imagination. We couldn't see that a relative, a friend, could bring the truth to us. We just couldn't think past the narrow little case and ignored the evidence as a whole. So we set up a process where we looked at cases after conviction, after appeal, and after habeas, and I don't know whether that's still being done because the process is a little different now, and we'll be talking about that this afternoon. We also set up and advertised our unit so the community would know about it and defense attorneys would know about it. And we had a dedicated person to handle the responsibility of seriously looking at claims of innocence. So this is a much better system than relying on serendipity, relying on luck, relying on a personality-driven response to a claim. So that is the Reader's Digest version of Rick Walker and Allison Tucker's heroics.
Yeah. I want to say one thing in closing from this, and that is, you know, this could have been avoided with the testing of cigarette butts 12 years in, right? Before I was really even convicted. But they didn't because they used tunnel vision, right? And even today, right now today, it tore my family apart. It tore my family. My father died while I was in prison, right? Both my grandparents, a couple of my aunts, a bunch of family members, right? It just, honestly, my father contracted an ulcer, you know, and he's been my savior all of my life. He's done things, you know, to help me, and this tore him up because he couldn't fix it. He's like me. He couldn't fix it, and it just tore him up inside, right? And it ultimately killed him, right? So, I mean, if you get something out of this, you turn every stone over, every stone, any little bit of evidence that you get, you know, just don't bypass things. Don't look at it like that. You gotta really, really dig in deep, right? And get this. They could have found this long before this happened. So, I mean, just think about that.
Question, what happened to the co-defendant's deal after he recanted?
So the co-defendant, Rashawn Bowers, is still in prison. I retired 2 years ago. Shortly before I retired, I attended a parole hearing for him, and he wouldn't come out of his room for the hearing, so they put it over, I think, for 5 years. He will, I doubt he will ever be paroled, but he was convicted, and he pled guilty to 25 to life, and that there was no undoing that.
Some people may not know what Brady is, and you mentioned about the Brady problem.
I'm
Sheriff's
sorry.
So maybe you could maybe just do that. Tell us a little bit about that.
So the prosecution has an obligation to turn over all evidence which will be favorable to the defendant, exculpatory evidence, whether it's favorable for the actual trial or for sentencing. And so it really means that the defense should receive everything. And there were some receipts in there that supported the alibi witness, and there were also information from Bowers that he had had a deal very early on. And neither of those items were handed over to Rick Walker and his attorney.
So, Rick, could you just briefly tell us the 12 years you were in prison? What was life like for you in prison, and what year you were released? And just do it briefly, and we'll take some more questions.
Okay, from 92 to like 2000, I was so angry at the world that it made me sick, right? And I mean physically sick. And it wasn't till I just decided that I was tired of being sick and tired, right? And this and that is when I gave up. I gave up cigarettes, everything that was harming me inside, and I also gave up the fact that anger would kill me, right? And so I changed myself for the better, so that because I needed to survive this, I needed to get out, I needed to tell somebody what had happened to me, right? So in 2000, I just started reinventing myself, you know, school, everything, you know, and.
Okay. Rick, so Karen, what happened to the prosecutor who made the deal with Bowers?
Well, yeah, but he's retired now.
Okay. All right. Are there any consequences for the police officers and the investigators and the district attorneys for their shortcomings and outright mistakes?
Well, that's a difficult question, and if you look at exonerations across the country, the response by communities and bar groups is quite varied. There's nothing predictable. We've had attorneys in our office be disciplined for the state bar for mistakes. We've had attorneys be fired for failure to turn over Brady evidence. And other district attorneys' offices haven't responded in that way. There's also a political component to it. You know, district attorneys are elected, so depending on who's in office, the response will be different. So the community can throw someone out of office. The Bar Association can discipline you, but there is not a universal response.
So if you have other questions for Karen and for Rick, you can ask them that during the break. I'm going to end with a comment. It's not a question, but I think it's so appropriate to end this segment. On the topic of heroes, Karen Sinanu Towery went to the prison to tell Rick of his release, brought him clothing, and walked him out the front door with dignity. Thank you, D.A. Sinanu Towery, for not just restoring innocence, but dignity as well. Thank you both.
We'll fix that later.
That sounded even later.
Yes.